Um, I'm from Florida, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself if you don't know, or even if you might care. I was born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and my background is as a newspaper journalist. I still write a column for the Miami Herald. I've never lived anywhere from Florida, and that's my excuse for my novels. I don't know anything. The weirdness of Florida is my daily reality. And everybody's moving to Florida now, which is a lot more material for me. Our newest Floridian, former residence was in Manhattan, apparently. Now he's down there golfing. The material is priceless. I'll talk to you about the first book I ever wrote with just my name on it was a book called Tourist Season. I had done 3 novels with another reporter at the Herald, really traditional thrillers sort of ripped out of our reporting notebooks. One about the cocaine war, one about marijuana smuggling in Key West, and another that was set in China, where my buddy Bill Montalbano had been stationed for the Herald, and one of the first reporters in Beijing. So those were kind of straight thrillers that we actually had to sit down and plan, and collaborating on fiction was a challenge. Bill and I had very different writing styles, but we worked together in the newsroom, so we had thick skins, and we would just each have assigned chapters and characters, and he would come back from one of his foreign trips, and we would sit facing typewriters like they were pianos, and we would rip each other's stuff apart, just tear it apart before there were computers or anything. And we didn't get our feelings hurt, and we somehow came up with a singular voice that anyone who read those novels couldn't tell which of us had written which chapters or which characters. And this was useful at the time because Bill, when he was a foreign correspondent, got very lonely. His wife and kids were back in Miami, so Bill, when I would get the pages from him, from China or from wherever he was in the Mideast, he might send 100 pages, and 40 of the pages would be sex scenes. And we had the same agent. She would call me up and she'd say, you got to tell Bill we got to take some of these scenes out. You can't, the novel is not moving forward. It's just him fantasizing about being home. And so I had to do this artful job of negotiating even down to the individual acts that were being described. I would say, well, can we take that out of that scene? I'll trade you one of these for one of these, but we've got to cut it down. And the other thing that we did at the time was that because our wives at the time maybe were a little suspicious when they read something in a novel that had not happened in their real lives. Let's put it that way. And so our standard line was if either of us were questioned, we would blame it on the other guy. No, Bill wrote that. I have no idea where he got. I've never seen a ferret. I don't even know how it got in the room. That's that kind of thing. So we did 3 novels together, and then we decided we both wanted to write our own books, and I wanted to write a very different kind of book, not a traditional thriller, just growing up in Florida and being as angry as I was all of the time about what was happening in Florida. So I had a novel I wanted to write called Tourist Season, which was about tourists started disappearing from Florida. There was a little band of sort of misbegotten eco-terrorists at the time started making tourists disappear in the hope that it would stem the whole influx into Florida. At the time I wrote it, more than 1,000 people a day were moving to the state of Florida. And as I stand here before you today, more than 1,000 people a day are moving to Florida. That's net. That's including those who die off. Where our population, I know, we have to count those, but it's still a net of over 1,000. So you can see how much good the book accomplished. So anyway, the editor that had edited me and Bill was kind of nervous about what I was going to do. He said, well, it's just going to be like Powder Burn, right? It's just going to be like Trapline. I said, no, it's going to be kind of different from anything Bill and I did. He said, all right, well, send me a few pages. And the early part of that novel, we used to have this big, fantastic event in South Florida, the Orange Bowl parade. When the Orange Bowl football game was held, they would close off Biscayne Boulevard, and they'd have this huge parade. They had an Orange Bowl queen, and they had floats, and they always had the big highlight was the Shriners always, little motorcycles and the little cars that goes zipping around Biscayne Bowl. The Shriners were a big part of that. So early on in the book, one of the people who disappear at the hands of the terror, they grab one of the Shriners off a beach. Now, it all happens off camera, and it's very, very tastefully done. There's no graphic Shriner violence at all. The chapter ends where all you see is the fez on the beach and the little waves lapping over the fez. I thought, it made sense to me. My editor calls me and goes, I don't. And I said, no, this is the book. And he goes, I don't think this is so different from anything you ever did with Bill that I'm not sure how we're going to market it or how we're going to sell it. But we'll go, okay. And he took a chance. So the book is published, and it does pretty well, and it got pretty good review in the New York Times. And Tony Hillerman, God bless his soul, he was just great. And so time came for a new book contract. And Neil, my editor, says, what are you going to write about now? I said, I have a great idea for a second novel. I said, it's about sex, murder, and corruption on the professional bass fishing circuit. And my pitch was, this is literary territory that I've pretty much got to myself at this point. I'm waiting for Styron and Cheever, Diddy, and they'll discover the world of bass fishing eventually, but I'm going to be the first one there. And there was all kinds of cheating and scandal going on. Nobody knew this but me. And my editor looked at me with the blankest expression. What is bass? What is, he's in Midtown Manhattan. He had no idea what I was talking about. So, but that's the book I wrote. It was a book called Double Whammy, and I'm still proud to this day that it ever got into print, because you cannot pitch that. You could pitch that to 30 editors in New York, and all of them would just say, "Very nice meeting you. Good luck with your fishing," and they would send you home. But I had a sort of a larger picture in mind at the time about what was sort of happening in the culture, and there was a TV preacher in it who was hypocritical. He was fooling around. He was doing, that never happens. This is like before Jimmy Swaggart. I was ahead of the curve on all this stuff. And it was still one of the most bizarre, and I'll tell you how bizarre it was. I was always trying to be topical because I was still, and I still am working for the newspaper, but that time I was still going into the actual newsroom 5 days a week, and I hadn't started my column yet. I was on the investigations team at the Miami Herald, and so I had a full-time job, and I was writing at night. And so you want to be topical. And at that time, when I was writing that book, it was the beginning of the pit bulldog fascination in this country. And it sort of started in South Florida. Every two-bit dope dealer would go get a pit bulldog, a mean-ass pit bull, and chain him in the yard to guard their stash, whether it was weed or coke or whatever it was. Every dope dealer had pit bulldogs. And they'd break off the leash, and they'd attack the kids, and they'd attack old people. It was started all over the country. And at one point, Newsweek magazine had a snapping, snarling pit bull on the cover, a cover shot of the magazine. So I thought, well, I've got to work a pit bulldog into this novel. I've got to stay timely. So back in those days, I think there was even a statute in Florida that every mobile home park had to have at least one or two free-running pit bulldogs. And I think it was written into the Homeowners Association contract. So I have a burglar in the book, a burglar. I'm not a big fan of burglars. And so I have him breaking into a trailer. And he's breaking, and he's got a screwdriver. He's breaking into a trailer, and suddenly out of the shadows flies this big pit bull, grabs on his arm. There's a big struggle. The guy takes his screwdriver, and he kills the pit bulldog with it in this life or death struggle. Dog doesn't let go of his arm. After death, now he can't, the dog is dead as a doornail, but it's stuck on his arm. So it begins a relationship, about 104 pages in the novel, between the guy and the dead pit bull. It was kind of in a way, it was a Disney journey sort of thing. He becomes delirious from the pain and the infection, and he names the dog, and he drives with it everywhere, and he goes through the toll booth at the turnpike, and the attendant's going, and he can pet the dog and everything. And I didn't find anything particularly strange about it because to me, it was the ultimate pit bull story. So this is true. So I was out doing what little touring I did. I was talking to a group of lawyers in Kendall, Florida, when the book came out. I went down there, and there's a lawyer's luncheon, and afterwards I'm shaking hands, signing a few books, and some guy comes up and pulls on my sleeve. He goes, "This is a lawyer," He says, and I said, "Yeah, He goes, "Who told you about the pit bull?" I said, "What?" Who said, "Who told you about the pit bull?" And I said, I just made that shit up. Are you kidding me? And he goes, "No, you didn't." So he proceeds to tell me this story, that he lives in a very nice neighborhood. He's walking his golden retriever, minding his own business. And out of the blue, one of the neighbors apparently has a pit bulldog. It leaps the fence or, breaks the padlock, does something, comes loping across, charging across the neighborhood, and his poor old golden retriever is just unleashed. And the pit bull jumps on the golden retriever, bites him on the back of the neck. And the golden retriever breaks, is just trying to break up. So this is Miami. So the lawyer does what every attorney who's walking his dog does. He reaches into his waistband and he takes out his 9mm. And he opens up on the pit bulldog, kills the pit bulldog. Pit bulldog doesn't let go of his golden retriever. The noise of the gunshots terrifies the golden retriever, who takes off running down the street with this pit bull flapping on his neck. All the neighbors come out and they run back to the end of the cul-de-sac, and they've got the poor golden is just sitting there. He's got a dead dog on it. So the lawyer waving his, let me through, I'll handle this, and empties the clip into the pit bulldog until finally the jaw shut. Anyway, he rescues his dog. The story is the golden was fine. Golden was okay. The point was I had written a scene that I thought was so detestable that it would never happen in real life, and then this guy comes up with something better. It's not the first time that this has happened to me. So I find myself, these days it's even harder to invent. I did a novel a couple years later, and it was a true story. I had a couple novels out, and someone sent me there was a magazine or a periodic called Journal of Popular Culture, and there was an article about my work in there. And I thought, man, a Journal of Popular Culture. So I started reading it. And the guy's, it reads like a thesis. It's somebody's thesis. And he'd analyzed all the novels I'd written to that point. And he says, the one recurring symbol that appears in every Carl Hiaasen novel is a floater. Now, in Florida, a floater, in police jargon, is a dead body in the water. And almost all of them are in the water. We have so much water, so... But he says this recurs and he had paragraphs on the whole floater phenomenon. I'm reading this. First of all, my first reaction is, I didn't know I was this fucking brilliant. I mean, I've got the symbolism, I had no idea. Then the second thing is, I realize I'm halfway through a novel right now, no floater. I don't have a floater. I'm about to blow this guy's thesis out of the water. So I'm scrambling around now in the middle of the novel. I got to get me a floater. I got to work this. This is how the literary mind works. And I'm going, I got to get me a floater. So at the time, the novel I was working on was called Native Tongue, and it was about a third-rate theme park that was erected in this very delicate area. There's a coral reef on one side, endangered, and a real sleazy guy. And he does everything on the cheap, the theme park, including animals. He's got a bad killer whale that's gotten bounced from a bunch of SeaWorlds. He's got all these bad animals. One of them he's got in the novel is he's got a bottlenose dolphin that's just no good. His name is Dickie the Dolphin. And he's got him in a tank, and he's like the obligatory Florida dolphin thing. And I don't know if you've been to Florida lately, but you can go to these exhibits, and you get to swim with the dolphins. It's called a dolphin encounter. For a couple $100, you can get in a little lagoon with the dolphins, which is, believe me, the highlight of every dolphin's day. Have tourist number 75 jump jump in the water, squeaking like Flipper, groping for the dorsal fin. Yeah, they love that. So what had started happening, there was a story, it came out on the west coast of Florida. They were starting to have these incidents at these marine, they swim with the dolphin exhibits, and PETA, and not just PETA, but a lot of other groups were trying to get these swim with the dolphin programs shut down because some of the dolphins in these programs had had enough. They were done. And they were exhibiting what the Miami Herald, being a family newspaper, euphemistically called aggressive behavior towards some of the human swimmers. It was more than aggressive behavior. It was sexual behavior directed primarily at female humans. And it's a terrifying manifestation. If you know anything about porpoise biology, a full-grown male dolphin may go 700, 800 pounds. They are endowed proportionately. There is a prehensile aspect to their equipment. So they may not have arms, they may not have legs, but they can grab you. And this, of course, I had my two roles. First of all, in my role as a columnist for the Miami Herald, I always felt a duty to put anything in the paper that would scare the living shit out of tourists. I felt it was my duty to get as many out of them as far as I could. So first thing I do is I interviewed a legal secretary whose boyfriend for her birthday had bought her a dolphin encounter in Key Largo. And she had gone down there, and dolphin, she jumped in the lagoon. And you know the guys, you've been to these things, the guys all wear little khaki Steve Irwin outfits, and they're really tan, and they're hopping around the side of the lagoon. None of them can even swim, those dudes. They will not go in the water if you gave them $100. They are not getting in the water. So she's in the water. This dolphin takes a liking to her in a big way, and she starts screaming, help me, help me. And she's fighting the dolphin off, and the guys are going, try to get out if you can. We're not going in there. So she extricates herself from the relationship, and she climbs out and is very upset, and she doesn't, they did videotape in those days. She doesn't want the videotape. Who would you show it to? Why would you show it to them? But anyway, I get the first person story about this attack, and of course I do a column. We slam it into the paper. It's again tastefully done. It doesn't get too graphic, but it gets the point across. And the lead was something like, if tourists don't have enough to worry about now, they have to worry about getting. I don't think I used the word screwed. Something by Flipper, blank by Flipper. Well, this is just right. Flipper was the TV show of my generation there. And the whole Flipper name is trademarked, apparently. And across the bay from the Miami Herald is the Miami Seaquarium, where the current Flipper lived at the time, the existing Flipper. And the owners of the Seaquarium seemed to think that I might have in some way libeled the reputation of the real Flipper by casting him as a horny specimen. So I'm sitting at my desk in the newsroom, and the phone rings, and this guy named Art, who owned the Seaquarium. He goes, yeah, that column, our Flippers doesn't do that. We don't even let anybody swim a Flipper. You've slandered Flipper. I'm going to take you need to do a retraction. I said, okay, Art, I'm just going to read to you what the retraction would say. Please, sorry, I said that Flipper was going to hump a tourist. The Seaquarium says that he will not, and I'll get into the whole thing. Would you like that retraction? He listens, saying, no, forget about it. He hangs up the phone. But anyway, so now I've got it in the paper. But more importantly, in my novel, which I don't have a floater yet, I have Dickie the dolphin swimming in this tank. And there's a real bad guy in the novel who's based on a real-life group of police officers who had been arrested in Miami. They were crooked cops, and they were all heavily on steroids, and they just went nuts and started killing people and everything. So I based one bad actor in the novel on that. And so my protagonist is at the theme park that night. The bad guy, Pedro's at the theme park. Now, my protagonist at the time was sneaking around the theme park trying to do deeds. Pedro, the steroid-addicted security guard, is so addicted to steroids, he's mainlining. He's dragging an IV drip, pure steroids, mainlining. And that's how he's guarding the theme park. So they meet face to face on the catwalk above Dickie. Just picture this. It's a moonlit night. Dickie's minding his own business in the tank, and there's a fist fight between the protagonist and Pedro. Bang, 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 and my good guy gets off a punch. Pedro goes tumbling into his IV rig, tumbling after him, lands in the tank where Dickie, on a moonlit night, is having romantic thoughts. And he proceeds to romance Pedro to death. I got my floater. Pedro's got what he deserves. I felt a sense of great literary achievement as I finished that chapter. Again, it goes up to the editor. There's questions. I send him the clippings about the dolphins that have had it now, that are sort of getting with the humans, and I settle things with newspaper clippings. That's what I always do when there's doubt raised, because even in New York, they don't believe some of the stuff I write. So I send them the clipping or the headline. They'll say, okay, that's enough. So this was before the Florida Man hashtag, where now everybody knows what a demented place it is. But at the time, I still had a lot of convincing to do. But so then I saved the guy's thesis, too, because there was a floater in the novel, and I felt good at the end. That book was called Native Tongue. And in all the novels since then, you try to take something, a shred of something that really happens, and crank it up a little for the purposes of satire. And it's getting harder and harder on the dial to find where you can crank it and get ahead of the news, particularly in the last few years. There was a story that my oldest son was a reporter at the time, and he had sent me a story from the Lower Keys, and I lived in the Keys for a while, and I was living there when this happened, and I didn't really realize it happened. But there was a woman. Dave Barry has written about this in real life too. But there was a car accident on a place called Ramrod Key. If you've ever been in the Keys, on your way to Key West, it's like 23, 24 miles out of Key West. There was an unusual car accident. A car full of tourists was heading to Key West, and they were struck from behind on US 1, the overseas highway. Both cars pull over, and they find the state trooper who's quoted in the Miami Herald story. It was a great quote. He wanders up to the scene, and he finds something very unusual. And the driver of the car that struck the other driver is a female woman who had been, again, in the Herald's way we wrote it, had been shaving her bikini area while driving 60 miles an hour down the overseas highway. Became distracted. Bam! Hits somebody. I mean, so the poor state trooper, and she's going, and she's questions her, ma'am, can I ask why you're doing that, why you're driving, why? And she goes, well, I'm going to Key West, I have a date. Passenger next to her speaks up and said, that's right, she has a date. Passenger is her ex-husband. He's accompanying her. He had reached over and was steering to give her a little extra dexterity during the hygiene session. They went to jail. But anyway, the state trooper, it was a great quote. He goes, I've seen a lot of stuff on this highway. He goes, a couple years ago, he goes, I stopped someone at this same mile marker, driving along, and he had needles sticking out of both arms. He said, but this is worse than anything I've ever seen. So I clipped out the story. Well, I think Scotty sent it me, and I had it on a corkboard over my desk for the longest time. Because first of all, my big problem with this, how do you improve on it for fiction? You can't. honestly, you can't improve on it. But secondly, it was so good, you're just going, oh, I got it. So I ended up using it as the beginning of a novel called Razor Girl. And it was just so good. And I just thought, and you know what you do, if any of you heard George Saunders earlier talk about this, what you do is, and I'm with him, last night, we did the big event with Jim Patterson, and Jim, he outlines like a fiend, meticulously. He loves outlines, and when he's collaborating with all these authors, 40, 50, 60-page outlines, beginning to end, first chapter to last. And as I told him, when I got out of college, my one resolution after all the creative writing classes and everything I took was that I would never do another freaking outline again in my life. I hated outlines. And to me, as a writer, they always felt like handcuffs. They always felt confining. So I have no earthly clue how my books are going to end when I start them. None. And sometimes it shows, but I always quote my friend, the great Elmore Leonard, when he was asked, he often got asked this question. I was with him when he did on several occasions, and a reader would say, do you know how your books are going to end when you start them? And his answer was the greatest answer there goes, why would I write the book if I knew how it was going to end? Do you get that? As a writer, do you understand as a point, my books are character, obviously the novels are more character-driven, but there's nothing greater than being surprised by a character in a pleasant way, a character that maybe you thought was going to be a walk-on, and all of a sudden they start saying and doing things, and they bring to this whole new dimension to the novel, and it's very, very exciting. But you can't have an outline because you can't break. This is your path. The way I do it is if I get surprised, I go this way, I can go this way, I can do whatever I want. It's a tightrope because you don't know. In my case, usually I'm about 2/3 of the way through the manuscript before I start figuring out exactly how it's going to end. But a good example of this is a character that's appeared in a bunch of my novels, and he appeared very first in the novel Double Whammy about the bass fishing mess. It was a character that I just needed a hermit guy. There was a scene where I have a character running through the swamp in Florida, and I needed a hermit guy. I needed an exchange with a hermit guy. And I wanted a hermit guy to have some backstory. So I thought, who would be living out here in the middle of nowhere? And the other thing about him was he lived off roadkill. Yeah, but I clipped a story about a Pennsylvania state trooper, I swear to God, they called him Officer Roadkill. He had a stand-in freezer, like a Burger King-sized freezer at his house, and if ever there was a roadkill, deer, possum, raccoon, he'd come in his squad car and take it back, skin it out, and hang it in his freezer. I read this whole article about him, and so I thought, there's a hobby you don't hear about every day, and I wanted to give that to one of my characters. So I said, hey, I know he's a hermit guy and he lives off roadkill. We got tons of roadkill in Florida, roadkill everywhere. But what would his backstory be? He's out in the middle of this, and he's only going to be around for 1 or 2 chapters. And I thought, you know who would end up here? Somebody who had been the governor of Florida and just went nuts in Tallahassee, just went batshit crazy, and just ran out, stripped off his clothes, ran out of the governor's mansion one day and disappeared, because that's what Tallahassee will do to you. Probably Sacramento has the same effect. I would imagine, for an honest, this guy, his backstory was he was a Vietnam War hero. He'd come back. They said, you'd be great to run for office. He was an environmentalist. He was a progressive. He was a smart guy, a military hero. He gets elected governor, and he goes to Tallahassee, surrounded by drooling thieves everywhere. And the corruption, incredible. And he just couldn't take it, and he just ran out and went crazy. I said, that's a good hermit guy for my guy to run into. Him sitting in the swamp, roasting up a possum that he got off 109. Just put it on the spit, Why not? A harmless little scene. There was almost a warm and fuzzy atmosphere to it. So anyway, this character now goes by the name of Skink in my novel. He becomes, in that little section of the book, he all of a sudden starts saying and doing things that I've always fantasized about saying and doing, never got away with. And he just starts growing. He gets more and more interesting. So I keep him around, and pretty soon he becomes sort of the moral engine of that strange little novel. and really propels everything else that's going on. But it was a perfect example of if I'd been in an outline, if I'd been stuck in an outline, he wouldn't have been able to do that. And then, and he's appeared in several novels, different ways since then. But I liked, he was one of the few characters that I still cared enough about at the end of that novel that I wanted to see him again. But again, part of that becomes the freedom of not being disciplined enough to outline. I don't have the discipline to do it. I don't have the patience to do it. Our lives are not, none of our lives are outlined in advance. I mean, it's all serendipity and chance and bad luck and good luck and people colliding each other. So whenever I'm starting a novel, what I do is I always have the characters in my head first. I sort of start assembling a cast of characters that I think would be interesting just to write about in general. And then you have an imaginary stage. And what would happen if you put them on that stage, just started letting them bump into each other and see what happens. And now that is not something any creative writer teacher is ever going to recommend how you proceed into a novel, because it is chaotic and it is a tightrope, and what if it doesn't work and all that stuff. But it's the only thing that keeps it interesting for me. I have many friends who are successful writers, and they are incredibly disciplined. They're on contracts at least one book a year, or maybe 18 months, and they have recurring characters, a Joe detective or Jill detective character who are very successful. People love the books, and it's just bang, bang, bang. And I can't work that way. I could not. First of all, it would seem like, from my mind, I would get to the sense of I was recycling. Secondly, it's kind of fun to start from scratch with new characters because you learn about them. What happens if you have the recurring character, and again, they become franchises that are extraordinarily successful, is that you start writing with the assumption that all your readers have read all your other books about that character. You don't get a chance to rebuild that character. And if you do, it's stale because you're reciting stuff that you put in other novels. It's much better, to me, when you don't know everything about the character when you start, when it's just kind of fun and fresh and strange. And I mean, it's nothing that any creative writing, what's scary is that when people, your readers, who I love my readers, but the fan base is sketchy at times. I'd written a novel years ago called Skin Tight, in which a character loses his hand to a barracuda in Biscayne Bay. Okay, and this was based on a real incident that had happened. And don't laugh. The victim was a personal injury lawyer. Everybody laughs at that. Why? Anyway, he was a personal injury lawyer who was a diver, big diver, very, very good diver. And there's certain wrecks in the Keys, reefs, where they have resident barracuda because people go down there and feed them. They take bags of fish and feed big, giant barracuda with giant teeth. This is really smart, by the way, because their brains are about that big. And if you happen to have for instance, a piece of jewelry on or a watch or anything flashy, they sometimes don't know the difference between that and a fish. So he's down there, and he had, in those days, this is before, they had to take big video cameras. He loved to take video cameras of himself down there, and he was down there, and the other thing he would do is he would put a fish in his mouth, and barracuda would come snatch it, and they would send these tapes to his clients to show them how tough he was. So he's doing that one time, and he's down there feeding the barracuda, and he's doing that, and thwomp. Oops. I think 4 fingers. Tops, not all the way down, but most of the digits gone. Blood everywhere. It was a mess. Here's what he does. I like the guy. You got to admire him. He gets back up. His hands open. He just fed a barracuda his fingers, gets all fixed up, and he goes, "Where's the tape?" And he told me he sent the tape to his best clients to show how tough he was. Tape of himself having his fingers bit off. Now, see, that's better than anything I could invent. So I didn't want to just repeat that story. So I had this, in the book, the guy who loses his hand to barracuda is a bad guy, and his name is Chemo. He has an unfortunate dermatological condition that all his friends in high school and elementary school nicknamed him Chemo. It's very sad. So he has some basis for being a bad guy. Anyway, he loses, and he's a bouncer at his club in South Beach. He's a bouncer. So he loses his hand to the barracuda, and they're offering him various prosthetics. And he says, I'm a bouncer. I'd like something special. He said, you know what I would like? And so I had it in my mind would be, because I was at one of these clubs, what would have been the best thing to have as a bouncer, if you're in there and you got to settle a fight, is a big weed whacker, a big, a weed lawn trimmer, one of those things. You walk into the mosh pit, everybody quiets down with one of those. So I went to a friend of mine who was a plastic surgeon, and I said, Jerry, don't tell me if this is plausible or not. I just want to know if it was possible. If I came to you and needed a prosthetic and I wanted a weed whacker attached to my arm, how would we do that? So we sit down together. He came up with a whole great plan. And with the battery pack, you sling it, you could almost like a holster it under your shoulder, and the weed whacker would be here. So I gave Chemo this weed whacker. It was fantastic. And he used it. He ended up at the end of that novel, he went to prison, and they let him work in the garden up at Rayford. Why not? He's got a frickin' weed whacker. Where else are you going to put him? So anyway, I'm thinking that, I finish every novel thinking that's the sickest thing anyone's ever put into a book, and kind of proud of that. So a few years ago, I get a clipping from a paper in Gainesville, Florida, about a gentleman who, his profession, he was a big, friendly redneck guy. His profession was cleaning out golf balls from golf ponds and golf courses. And we got a lot of gators in Florida, and he was a big dude, and he was reaching in, and he wasn't underwater, but he was standing on the edge, and he was filling his bag full of Titleists, and a gator came up, plump, got his own. Now, he was lucky he wasn't killed. He was big enough that he was able to, because when they bite you, this is nothing you'll ever need to know, but if they bite you, immediately they start twisting like this to rip off the limb. That's what gators do. They don't crush you, they just twist the limbs off. And so it did that and popped his arm off. So the local paper went and interviewed him. He was incredibly good-natured about it. I mean, for someone that just went to, he was incredibly good-natured. They said, what are you going to do now? He goes, I think I'm going to get me one of them weed whackers and get it attached to my arm. I was so flattered, I have to say. In the sickest possible way, I was flattered. And years later, I did a book signing in Gainesville, and he came to the book signing. I didn't know he was in the book, and he came up and he said, and he showed me, and he goes, "See, I didn't really do it." Yeah. I said, "This is my fan base. I'm a pretty lucky guy." I'll tell you one other highly disturbing fan story, and I love this exchange, and I hope she's still with us today. This was after Double Whammy came out, and the pit bull story I told you about. The burglar had named the dead pit bull on his arm Lucas. He called it Lucas, and when he introduced him around and everything, the dead dog head. And I'm at a bookstore in Boulder, Colorado, and it's a mystery bookstore, and all these people are lovely, and I'm signing, and there's an elderly woman in line, and she comes up kind of sheepish, and she says, "Can I whisper something in your ear?" Usually, my initial response at book signings is not to say yes to that, but I felt like this, okay. She didn't look armed or anything, so I said, "Oh, sure." And she goes, this is her exact words, "I named my tumor after Lucas." Now, again, what's your reaction to that? Part of you is, aw, and part of you is, ooh, and then it's like, and she was so sweet. She had the sweetest, she looked like my grandmother. She had the sweetest, "I named my tumor after Lucas." She goes, "I love that book." And so I don't know what, I don't know if there's another author at this event, maybe in the whole of publishing, that's ever had a malignancy named after one of their characters. So I just said, oh, and I signed her book. And all I said was, are you okay now? She smiled. She rolls up her sleeve. Boom, 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 boom. Got a scarf for me to give. She goes, "Lucas is gone now." And she walks out real sweetly. So now I'm thinking, I've got a future in this business. One more true story, and again, it kind of goes back to that novel. No, but apparently, if you're a young writer starting out, or any kind of starting out, I'll give you one piece of advice I give is do not write about roadkill like I did. Do not. There's a whole subculture out there that you do not want to know about. There's people. I got roadkill recipes sent to me. I got the weirdest stuff you can imagine. There's a whole culture about roadkill that I had no knowledge of. And I was at a book signing outside of Chicago, or outside of Milwaukee, actually. This is a true story. And I'm signing, and there's a guy in the back of the store, and the owner comes up to me. He says, I just want to let you know, somebody has something. We don't know what it is. And there was no security at the store. And I go, what does he look okay? How does he? He goes, yeah, but just I'm warning you. So the guy, and he's walking, he's got something behind him like this. There was no place to go. It was a small store. I wasn't going to bail on everyone else. So the guy comes up to me. He goes, I did something for you. And I'm thinking he's got like a dead raccoon in a bag. I don't know what it is. It isn't. He pulls it out. It's an oil painting of a roadkill that he's done. It is not abstract. It's an oil painting. He presents it to me. And I look at it, and I swear to God, and I'm looking at the little animal, and there's a road. It's a bucolic scene, a bucolic Wisconsin scene. There's a little road and a pond, and there's a little flattened thing of fur. You could see, if I was a forensic guy, I could have told, is it Goodyear, is it Bridgestone? You could see the treads on this creature. And what do I do but thank him? But then I get back to my hotel room, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, and I've got it with me now. How did this even come about? He was in his house? Did he hear the screech of brakes and grab his pallet and his easel and run down to the road and set up and this poor little beaver, whatever it was, and just say, I know who would love this, and bring it to me? That was one of the most touching things that I've ever had happen. I'm almost out of time, so I'm not going to extend my time any, because I know there's someone else coming. I wanted to thank you all for coming, putting up with these silly stories, and I think it's fair to say that you all are as sick as I am if you're laughing at this stuff.